Hello, everyone. I think we're just about ready to start. I'm not sure if Jamie is back on or not. There he is. All right, let's begin. Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, February 8, 2022. The first item is roll call. Paul Jordan.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
Peter DiStefano.
Here.
Joe Murphy.
Here.
Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Josh Daly.
Here.
And Maria Mack is here. We are also joined by planning staff, Jamie Rabbit, Director of Planning, Jay Parker, Brian Wagner, and Amy Goins, Special Legal Counsel. The first item on our agenda is zoning text and map amendment, South County Hospital. Zoning text amendment application submitted by the South County Hospital proposing to revise the language within section 603, government and institutional GI zone of the zoning ordinance pertaining to the institutional master plan submission requirements for healthcare institutions. And I believe we have Mr. Prescott here as well, representing the hospital. Jamie, would you like to just bring us up? And also Mr. Revens has just popped on the screen. Good evening. Jamie, would you like to bring us up to date with the conversations and the progress that has been made in the past month?
Yep, Madam Chair, thank you. Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. We did have an opportunity to have one in-person meeting and one additional Zoom meeting with legal counsel, being counsel from the hospital, as well as Mr. Revens representing them, to discuss staff's position as articulated through the planning board with regards to proposed revisions. We worked on those revisions over the last 2 weeks and had our last discussion just a little over a week ago with the hospital and their representative. The result of that meeting was a revised application for a proposed text amendment that was submitted to the planning board and included in part of your packet. I believe Mr. Revens, as well as Mr. Prescott, are prepared tonight to run through their amended application and the highlights of that and the ramifications of their changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. So Mr. Revens, Mr. Prescott, whoever would like to begin and go through the revisions that have been made.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the board. As the planner indicated, we had 2 productive meetings, one in person and one by Zoom. And as a result of those meetings, we agreed to the request that is before you to amend the existing ordinance. The amendments are all highlighted for you in the packet that you received. Many of them have been discussed at prior meetings of the board as well as with staff. My client, through their attorney, Andrew Prescott, who's the general counsel to the hospital, have reviewed them with the planning staff and your solicitor, as well as the rest of our team. And we are pleased to submit this application. And I believe that we and the planning department are on the same page, that we think these are reasonable changes to the ordinance that will protect the interests of the town in ensuring the orderly management of the and development of the hospital's campus, and will be helpful and reasonable and balanced in terms of the hospital's ability to work within these proposed ordinance amendments. And therefore, we're happy to present this to you and hope that you will advertise it for a meeting at your next scheduled meeting for consideration and a vote of the planning board to make a recommendation to the town council with regard to the changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the public's information, Jay has put up on the screen the edited version. Planning board members had both a editor strike-through version in their packets as well as a clean copy. So I think that probably in order to continue with our usual thorough review of items, we should start with section 603.1 permitted uses. The first page doesn't have any real changes, but why don't we go through the document so that board members can make any comments. So this is page 1, which Jay is scrolling back to, which has essentially no changes. If we move on to page 2, the beginning of that page has a number 7 and starts with parking. And if you move down to the bottom of the page, section C, institutional master plan requirements, that is the first area in which there are some changes. Does anyone have any comments, questions on this particular section? Hearing none, let's move on to the next page. That would be page 3. Which continues the previous section along with filing requirements. There are some minor changes there. Previously approved master plan and the beginning of review and approval of the master plan. Thoughts on any of these revisions?
Maria, I do.
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
Going back a little bit, could I ask maybe planning staff to remind me again of the difference between major land development project and development plan review and how that affects the review process and the public participation process and whether that in effect changes this document?
Good question. Thanks, Susan.
So, Madam Chair, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director. I'll touch upon the public participation side. Major land development does require a public hearing. In the initial proposal by the hospital, they eliminated that after multiple discussions with the hospital. The requirement for a public hearing is back in your regulations. So with regards to public participation, there is no change with regards to the legal requirement of a mandatory public hearing. But there also is one additional item, and that is a meeting with the neighborhood prior to the submission of their application, which is new to the regulations. And that is something the hospital had proposed early on, and we've clarified when that needs to occur and who that needs to be with and the format for that. With regards to the integral differences between development plan review and major land use, I'll have Jay go over that.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Am I unmuted? Yeah, I am.
Yes, you are, Jay.
So major land development and major subdivision is, we won't talk about that because it's not relevant in this case, but a major land development is the development of multiple uses on one lot or one lot that expands over multiple parcels that in general is a complicated approval process. It typically requires pre-application, then conceptual master plan during a public informational meeting, and separately preliminary plan review at a public hearing and following final plan approval. Development plan review is a lesser approving, is a lesser process, less inclusive process, because it's meant to capture those items where there is an improvement, but there may not be as significant of an impact or as significant of as a use as in a major land development project. So development plan review can be some of the triggers for development plan review are parking spaces that are having to put in more than 5 parking spaces, things of that nature. As far as the timeframe, in a major development application, the planning board has the ability of combining the conceptual master plan and preliminary plan stages. Each stage is 90, has a 90-day requirement that is to render a decision by. With development plan review, there is no time frame associated with development plan review. That we're not held to any schedule like we are with major land developments. We kind of took the hybrid approach with this ordinance because we felt that requiring a public hearing at development plan review, there really is no need for the applicant to go through a conceptual master plan and then a preliminary plan process for the approval of a master plan. So we felt that if structure it like development plan review and then have the same requirements and public participation as a major land development project, it would serve the same purpose and be a little bit cleaner as opposed to having to deal with a conceptual master plan component for an approval of the master plan. It could get a little complicated. So we tried to streamline and make it a little bit more reasonable, I think, a reasonable approach for the approval process. Did I too much? Did I answer the question?
You did for me. Thank you. That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you, Jay. Someone has some kind of background noise going on in there, somebody who is not muted. So maybe just check and see if you have a TV or something going on. It seems to have stopped now, so we're good. Additional questions for this page? Jamie, I was hoping for a clarification on 2B, 4, and 5. And that is the 5% where it says any improvement or modification that increases the need for additional parking by more than 5%. Can you explain what we would be using as the parking criteria or the snapshot for parking in this case, particularly if there was just a modification to an existing plan made? How would that, how would the parking criteria be considered? Say if it was 5 years old or beyond that, how would we make sure that we are looking at something that is relatively up to date?
So, Madam Chair, that is a good question, and to address that this is within a section associated with the new or revised master plan, and it lays out some of the triggers where the landowner or the hospital will be required to either amend, revise, or submit a new plan. And these are kind of exemptions from that, or exceptions. And to your point, under item number 4, any improvement or modification that increases need for additional parking by more than 5%, they would have to submit to the administrative officer why they don't have to revise their master plan. And they would have to provide evidence that whatever they were proposing to do did not trigger that 5% mechanism. So we'll use an example of, they have 1,000 parking spaces and they were proposing to take some office space and move it to warehouse space, which had no effect on parking. They had 1,000 spaces. The net result of their change or utilization of interior space was no requirement for additional parking, so they wouldn't trigger that 5% aspect. a reverse of that would be they had warehouse space that they were going to convert to administrative space and add employees. And the addition of those employees on a particular shift increased the needs for parking by 6%. They would be required to come back for a revision to their master plan to add that component or that change that ticked the parking needs up to 6%. The same would be said for item number 5 with regards to AM and PM peaks, that if there were 100 cars at an AM peak and whatever they were doing on the hospital that is not contemplated in their master plan triggered an 11% increase to that AM peak, that would require either a new or revised master plan, and they would have to come back before the planning board. If they stayed under those elements, they could just deal with the administrative officer under the exemption and then go to the building department and zoning department for permits. So it's the base is in essence the day they ask for the exemption or thereabout. So if they were asking for an exemption, the information they submit to support their exemption needs to include that parking analysis and or traffic analysis, as well as the amount of square footage that's going to be affected.
Thank you, Jamie. Susan, did you have your hand up again? No?
I did, thank you.
Go ahead.
Right in this section here, it also says that plans will be submitted for any planned construction of a new building. Does somewhere else in this regulation, we also have planned construction of new parking lots? Like, would that be caught somewhere else, or does this need to also include any construction of parking lots or parking structures?
So there is, Madam Chair, again, Jamie Rabbit, there is language regarding, so you have a master plan. And Susan, if the master plan didn't include a parking structure, and for some reason the hospital proposed to do a parking structure, whether it's surface or above ground, and it's not contemplated in the plan, if it's more than that 5%, requires a update to the master plan. Okay, so if they're proposing new parking, in all likelihood, if it's associated with an expansion of the hospital, it has to be contemplated in their master plan. It should be schematic associated with how that parking's going to fit on the campus and how it impacts circulation, as well as AM and PM traffic loads on the surrounding streets will have to be part of their master plan.
Okay, sorry, so let me just clarify. If they were adding parking of less than 5% or some percentage, they wouldn't need to submit it in a master plan, or, sorry, is adding a 25 spot lot caught somewhere in this ordinance that they would need to at least talk with administrative staff?
Yeah, in essence, if they were adding 5 parking, talk to administrative staff, your staff, and claim the exemption.
Right.
If they were adding 30 parking spaces, there's multiple trigger mechanisms. One, where are the spaces going? Are they being done in a compliant manner? 2, are they under the threshold? And the other aspect of the threshold is, do they affect AM and PM peak by more than 10%? And the reason the 10%'s there is because there's a 5% accuracy issue with any AM PM peak analysis. So we'll use a really technical planning term. There's wiggle room in the first 5%, and the other 5% allows for the impact.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments? Jamie, I did have one other question that you might be able to answer. The last item on page 3, which is 3B, which relates to the time frame for decisions. Can you explain to the board what safeguards are in place in this document that will allow for appropriate time in terms of how you guarantee that the project or the submission has been sufficiently completed, number one. And then number two, because I do see the 90 days, and as some folks will remember, we used to have 120 days for most subdivisions, major land development projects, and so on. How can we be certain that we don't end up in that issue where something is certified complete, but because of the timing and the scheduling and the advertising, we don't actually see it until a month later? So 2 related questions.
Yes, so with regards to the time frame, there's probably 3 components to that. There is the requirement that I touched upon earlier, that the hospital meet with the neighborhood prior to applying to the planning board. So that's kind of the first notice with regards to the neighborhood being aware that something is potentially being amended, revised, or a new plan is being submitted, or a project is being contemplated. And that is before it comes even to the planning board staff or the department for completeness. And there are timeframes associated with that. Then when a formal application comes in, there's the 25-day completeness aspect from the date we receive that. So we'll flag it early on the administrative side. The planning board members will be made aware that we have received that information. That documentation becomes public the day it comes into our office. And once it's certified complete, it triggers 90 days. So the planning board should have a solid 3 months. And in essence, 3 months and 7 days, because we'll send agenda packets out before you have to make a decision. The intent is not to receiving application, complete it, schedule a hearing, and not send you the application until the hearing's scheduled. The intent is when it's submitted for completeness, the planning board is aware of the application. Once it's completed, it goes on the docket, and that application is distributed to the planning board members. You may not see it for another 3 to 4 weeks for a public hearing with regards to the formal hearing process or meeting process, but you will have it for a considerable amount of time before the scheduling of that hearing.
Thanks, Jamie. I just want to be sure that we don't want to end up at, a month and then needing more than one meeting, as we have with other applications in the past, and then have to ask for an extension. So again, given the reality that there are multiple projects being reviewed by planning staff at any given time. So I don't know if there needs to be any additional language so that we could ensure that planning board members received all of the information as soon as it's certified complete, regardless of when the public hearing might be, and have enough time within that time frame to potentially have more than one meeting. Certainly what we've gone through recently is testament to the fact that we want to have enough time to review something without necessarily having it take over multiple work sessions or having multiple extra meetings if it can be avoided. Just trying to be practical about it.
Now, I hear you, Madam Chairman. With regards to this, I think the issue, and we have it at the staff level, is The completeness aspect is really checking the boxes for the submission of material. I work closely with the planning board that if an applicant submits an application and one of the boxes is they submit a traffic analysis, and a typical traffic analysis includes AM, PM peak, the full load of the parking lot, and an applicant submits something just to be a placeholder. And for their traffic analysis, it's 2 paragraphs, but they call it a traffic analysis. So we have to check the box. I'm prepared as the director and working with our staff to make a recommendation. You hold the hearing, close the hearing, and deny the master plan for inadequacy. I think, the hospital has made statements, at least to staff, that they are committed to submit a plan that not just checks the box when it's submitted, but includes sufficient information so that a complete review can be done on day one, and that it's not an application that is submitted in a piecemeal manner.
Thank you, Jamie.
Hope that is the position of every applicant.
Yes, we can always hope. Additional thoughts on this particular page? If not, let's move on to page 4, which is a continuation of the master plan process and goes into the public hearing and then the contents required for the master plan. Questions, comments on this page?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Robin.
So am I correct in assuming that the hospital is putting on a presentation for the public at some location that isn't really specified except for that it's handicap accessible? Will that presentation be provided during the planning board meeting, or do we have to attend that other public meeting to know all about the plan? Will it be done redundantly? Are they going to present twice? Or is that meeting time maybe if we could see that prior presentation, we wouldn't have to use up so much of our meeting time presenting it again.
Robin, it's my understanding, Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a neighborhood meeting, but then a formal with notice master plan hearing before the planning board.
And that includes a presentation.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So yeah, Madam Chair, you're correct. The neighborhood outreach, that neighborhood meeting is prior to the formal application process to the planning board. And that's why we were comfortable that the hospital should make every effort in that informal neighborhood meeting to try and engage and answer questions that the neighborhood groups may have prior to coming to the planning board. But the formal presentation that is part of the record is before the planning board. There is no requirement that meeting minutes be kept for that meeting. It's really a work session for the hospital with the neighborhood. It could be a round table, it could be a facilitated meeting, it could be a presentation. That is up to the hospital. Again, we've had discussions that it's in their best interest to do a really good job with that neighborhood outreach, because Robin, to your point, when you hold your public hearing, if the neighborhood comes out and states in essence that outreach was a sham, you're going to question the good faith effort that the hospital made with regards to compliance with this regulatory requirement. And I think Mr. Prescott, as general counsel for the hospital, as follow-up comments once we go through this, can perhaps add to that and that commitment.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
well enough?
Good. And certainly it's a benefit to everyone for a neighborhood meeting to occur, because to give credit to neighborhoods and abutters, they have that day-to-day local knowledge. They have the ability to ask questions that may not be asked initially by board members or staff. So a lot of times you can find answers or develop areas of mutual benefit by having those sorts of meetings, particularly when they're in a less formal setting. Anything else on page 4 from anyone? Let's move on to page 5, which is a continuation of parking and circulation analysis. And then continues with a new section related to parking requirements of exemptions. Robin, go ahead. You're muted.
Sorry, thanks. Jamie just mentioned using the word parking lot structure as what I would interpret as a parking garage. Am I incorrect in that assumption? And I guess I would like an explanation of why it is so important to remove the word parking garage from item 7, looking at line 197, and replace it with parking lot structure. But then later in line 211, we use the word parking garage. So I get some clarification on why that language is being changed from parking garage to parking lot structure and so on.
Madam Chair, that may have been an oversight on behalf of staff. Our intent is to call it an above ground parking facility is considered a parking structure versus a parking lot. So again, we will make those words align.
And Jamie, the term parking structure might also cover something like a covered area for parking that you sometimes see that can additionally have solar panels placed on top of the structure. So that would cover any other variations that might come forward in the future. Yes?
It's possible it could, given the terminology of structure versus a surface parking lot.
Mhm. Anything else on this page?
Yeah, I have another.
Go ahead.
On item 8, on line 207, where we refer to architectural drawings, I find that I strongly feel that an architectural drawing really helps people comprehend the intention of the plan. And I don't see why that would not be required, why that would be considered so helpful.
So, Madam Chair, for clarification on this, the terminology of a architectural drawing, I don't want the planning board members to be misconstrued that elevations, architectural elevations are different than actual architectural drawings associated with the structure and elements of construction for the proposed building. This is intended for the aspect of construction drawings associated with buildability versus elevations. So the concern here is that any new building or existing structure may include elevations, but they do not include construction drawings.
but it doesn't look like we necessarily see it because then it's just up for administrative officer review.
You would, so if the applicant had elevations or rendering of what the structure were to look like when they finish their construction drawings, the administrative officer would review those construction drawings to determine consistency with the elevations. But the planning board would not be reviewing the structural integrity of walls, floor, electrical layouts, HVAC. That wouldn't be included at the master plan. That would be an administrative aspect between planning, zoning, and building.
Okay, thank you. I see that.
Jamie, one more question on number 7 relating to capital improvements and what the plan should include. At the end of the last sentence on 7, it says, and landscape buffers. Now, as board members know, a landscape buffer might be different from other landscaping improvements. Would this cover all of it, or do we need to be more specific? So obviously we would want to know about any enhancements to the landscape.
I think it's inclusive with regards to what our subdivision regulations require as it pertains to landscaping, that it's not just buffering. But again, if they were undertaking an internal meditation garden where some sidewalk was now, as long as it didn't affect circulation, that would potentially be something done administratively and not part of the master plan. But the intent is during the master plan that there's a broad discussion on landscaping as it relates to the property, which includes buffers.
Thanks, Jamie. Anything else on this page? Questions, comments? Let's move on then to the next page, continuing the discussion of parking, starting with number 4, and then ending with a section relating to modifications on an approved institutional master plan. Questions, comments? Jamie, on the last section, section F, where it relates to confirming a minor modification by the administrative officer, is that something that would be made available to the planning board just as an FYI, since no special meeting would be required? Or how would the board and or the general public, if even necessary, be made aware of any of these? Or is that not relevant? So just looking for
No,
clarification.
I think it is relevant. Again, anything, carry this forward. 6 months from now, they have an approved master plan. There are certain exemptions to that master plan that don't require a update, and there are certain modifications that can be made to the campus that don't require an update. All of those items require a decision to be made by the administrative officer.
Yep.
To check the box that in fact they don't or that they do. So we will, that administrative process will be there. At the discretion of the planning board, we can keep you apprised of those requests for exemptions. And I would intend to do that on at either our work session where the planning director reports out, or our regularly scheduled meeting where the planning director reports out on activities.
So would it be appropriate to state that in this language? Because as we've had in previous meetings, the conversation about future administrative officers who may not be Jamie, and wanting to be sure that there's an understanding that they will make the board aware of this sort of thing. I don't know, is this an Amy question?
The question is whether this is Amy Goen, Special Legal Counsel. The question is whether the ordinance as written clearly states when the administrative officer should notify the planning board of what exactly?
Of any modifications to an approved institutional master plan, which the administrative officer has the authority
Yep.
to make that, but whether they would make the board, even if the board does not need to take any action,
Yeah.
just to make them aware of, in order to ensure that that happens moving forward, should that be stated in this document?
Jamie, what's on the consent agenda currently for planning board meetings? Actually, I think it's called actions taken by the administrative officer. Those, all of those actions are placed on the agenda, not because of any legal requirement or requirement in the bylaws, correct? But just as a practice of the administrative officer out of courtesy.
Correct, yeah.
So with regard to all of them, so then my suggestion, Maria, would be rather than amending this specific ordinance amendment to address that, why don't we consider an amendment to the planning board bylaws that addresses the reporting that the administrative officer is required to give to the planning board on a monthly basis for all actions? That would be my suggestion.
I think we
Good
have
idea.
that already. Sorry.
Oh, okay, if we've, I
Yeah.
don't have the bylaws at hand, so why
No, we-
don't I review that separately?
But again, to Amy's point, Madam Chairman, I would absolutely agree that it's an administrative function of the officer or the planning director. I don't think it's a regulatory requirement, because if it was a regulatory requirement and it didn't occur, it jeopardizes the permitting process versus the administrative officer just failed to report as part of his duties working for the planning department. Again, in my tenure, we have reported all administrative actions to the planning board.
Mhm.
There's no intent to deviate from that policy.
No, I think that's understood. I just want to be sure that going forward, if there's a different administrative officer, that they follow the same protocol that isn't necessarily spelled out here in terms of notifying the planning board.
Understood.
Agree, and I think since it's an issue that's bigger than the hospital, let's put it somewhere other than in this ordinance amendment.
Sure, sounds good. Any further questions, comments before we ask for comments from the public?
Madam Chair, if you could, before you open to the public, I did ask if Mr. Prescott
Yes.
could go up on the neighborhood intent of the
Certainly.
meeting.
Thanks, Jamie. Mr. Prescott, you have the floor.
Yes, Andrew Prescott, General Counsel for South County Health. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to comment on that public workshop piece of this, which is very important. The sequencing of the public workshop and the application and then the formal public hearings is very intentional, and I think very intelligent as well, because what that does is it allows an opportunity before the application is fully baked and committed to by filing to have a dialogue with the neighborhood, and for the applicant, the hospital, to explain its intended application, get neighborhood feedback, have an actual dialogue with the neighborhood, and either correct misunderstandings that might otherwise arise, or make changes to the draft application so that what gets put before the planning board really takes into consideration the perspective of the neighborhood. And I think it's a very, very smart way to go through that process. We certainly would prefer to file an application after neighbors have an opportunity to voice any concerns or articulate their perspective. And, in terms of a sham, process, we would really be taking a gigantic risk by conducting some sort of sham process, then filing an application, because you can bet that the neighbors would say that it was a sham process, and then we've lost credibility with the board. So we would certainly never do that. It wouldn't be smart, and it wouldn't be ethical either.
Thank you, Mr. Prescott. It definitely is both intelligent and inclusive to go through the public workshop process. Anything else from anyone before we go to the public? All right, there are a number of folks who are listed on the attendees list. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Elizabeth Scott has her hand raised.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, hi, Elizabeth Scott. I live on Hillcrest Road. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this draft. So I think my comments I have 4 areas of comment. The first is on page 2, and it is line 56, section number 9, about lighting, and it says see section 704 of the zoning ordinance. And as I understand it, section 704 of the lighting, that lighting section says any lights used to illuminate a parking lot shall be so designed as to reflect the light away from adjoining property and away from streets. The planning board may, at the time of development plan review, require off-street parking lots to be illuminated during non-daylight hours if necessary for reasons of public safety or efficient traffic circulation. And I believe that's all it says. And I would just note that as I sit here in my house, I can probably count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that are lights that are pretty much directed like into my home. And it is certainly intrusive. And when I went back to review the zoning ordinance, this is from the October 13th, 2021 project review memo that was prepared by the planning department. And on page 8 of that document, one of the sections that was struck out was number 3, which pertains to a master lighting plan. And I'm not necessarily saying there ought to be a master lighting plan, but there are elements to this paragraph that was struck out that I think are really important, because basically we have a situation where the current lighting situation is really deleterious. There are off-site impacts to properties, and it's not clear that section 704 of the zoning ordinance really adequately addresses it. So I would just ask that there be consideration to adding language to that section that would specifically address the issue of off-site impacts of the lighting at the hospital, whether it be in the parking lot or on the buildings. So that's my first area of comment. The second is on page 3, and this is in that section under the filing requirements. And it's paragraph B. I just find this paragraph overall to be really kind of confusing the way it's written. I think it could be written in a more straightforward way, so it's a little bit more understandable. But with that being said, it seems to me that, so currently, as I understand it, there's 790 current parking spots at the hospital. So if the limit that they would be allowed, as I understand reading this, that they would be able to do actions, including increasing parking for up to 5% increase over their existing. So 5% of 790 is 39.5. So let's say they're proposing a 39 car lot. As I read this, they would be allowed to do that without any modification to their master plan. That seems like a kind of a big increase. So I would ask that there be consideration given that any planned construction of a parking area of some aerial extent. I don't know what that should be, but 39 seems to be too big. And then the other thing is that there obviously, what has brought the neighbors out in force in the past has been the proposed conversion of the town farm playground and ball field into a parking lot. I mean, it already is kind of used as a parking lot, but this would officially make it a parking lot. And and that would be a purchase of that property from the town. The hospital would buy it from the town. So there's no provision in here that should they purchase or presumably sell property, but I can't imagine they're going to sell property. But it seems like there ought to be a provision for the purchase of property. So that would be my comment there. And then moving on to page 4, the bottom of page 3 and the top of page 4. So the neighborhood meeting is a fabulous idea. And, we certainly have had productive meetings, neighborhood meetings with the hospital over the years. The thing that is a bit of a misnomer in terms of calling it a neighborhood meeting as it's currently written is that basically it's a notification to the abutting property owners. So that would basically be just that first row of, it's just the parcels that are immediately abutting the hospital. But in fact, the neighborhood is much more than that. And so by only having the notification to those abutting neighbors, it basically puts the burden on those neighbors to get the word out to everybody else that there is in fact this meeting. I don't know that it necessarily needs, I think the abutters ought to be given certified mail notification. I don't know that that needs to be for everybody in the neighborhood, but I think that there ought to be some requirement for at least a US Postal Service regular mail notification to all neighbors. So, whether you name it by street or by, the version of the amendment that was the staff, the planning department staff comment write-up was a 500-foot from the perimeter of the subject parcel, which would in essence cover both sides of the street, say on Hillcrest and the other, streets around the neighborhood. But the entire neighborhood is impacted by the hospital. So the entire neighborhood should be invited to the neighborhood workshop, if in fact that is really the intent. So my last area of comment is on page 5. And the parking management plan is just a particularly section B, that is the traffic demand management strategies that would be included in a parking management plan. To me, those are just essential elements that should be in every parking management, that every parking lot in town, not just for the hospital, but every parking lot, every large institutional or commercial property should have a parking management plan that basically talks about available public transportation and, shuttle services and bicycle parking. We should be really encouraging alternate forms of transportation. We have a climate change issue here, folks, and the only way that we can begin to change this, problem that we face is by actually changing the way that people are getting to work or getting to do the errands or necessary office visits and so forth, or just visiting people in the hospital, that would allow for alternate forms of transportation that are less environmentally degrading. So I would just ask consideration be given that parking management, those demand management strategies be incorporated as part of what would be part of the master plan. And I think with that, thank you for your indulgence on my lengthy set of comments, but that does it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Since we are looking to kind of finalize this document prior to sending it to the council, Jamie, Mr. Prescott, Mr. Revens, would you like to make comments on Elizabeth Scott's questions and concerns at this point? How would you like to handle it?
Madam Chair, if we could hear from all the members of the public, and there may be similar questions.
Okay.
And then we can respond to them. And if there are any overlaps, we can address them.
Yes, I've taken notes so that we don't forget the concerns. Elle has her hand up.
Hi, good evening, Elle Nordsey of Broadmoor Road in Wakefield. I just wanted to say that I appreciate all the attention and detail that this has been given. I know you guys have gone through a lot in the last couple months, and I had expressed that I felt it was really important that this was given a lot of detail. So I see that all parties have come together in a thoughtful way. I really appreciate that. I have a lot of respect for Liz, and I always agree with her points. The one that had stuck out to me as well was the 200-foot buffer for the neighborhood meeting. I think 500 would be appropriate. I would not get notified. Perhaps 1,000 would cover much more of the actual surrounding neighborhood. It is pretty dense in there. But other than that, I mean, this, just really shows a lot of professionalism and dedication from all the parties involved. So I just want to really thank you for your time and making sure that, the hospital can continue to function and provide these important services while, we all stay neighborly around here. So thank you.
Thank you. Looking to see if there are MJ Henderson, Susan Benson.
This is Susan Benson on Hillcrest, and I just want to share with you our support in this neighborhood of Elizabeth Scott and all she has done to work hard and analyzing the information. We all support what she said tonight, and I don't think there's any reason for me to be redundant about it. But the neighborhood is everything to us. And if we don't communicate with the hospital and they work with us, it will be a very difficult situation for everyone. So thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Not seeing any hands up yet. Susan, have you re-raised your hand or have you forgotten to lower it?
For it.
This is MJ Henderson. I just wanted to
MJ,
add,
okay.
I have a suggestion for everybody that if you would drive through the neighborhood in the winter at night and see what we see from across the street from Elizabeth's house, 500 plus feet from the hospital, all night long, lights on, I would appreciate that. I think it's very important for the planning committee to see the neighborhood, to see what we're all talking about here. It's very different in the summer when the leaves are on the trees. In the winter, all the way down the street, we can see lights through the night and plows and everything else and garbage making noise. So it is important. 500 feet, 600 feet away from the hospital, we're all affected by it. And I'm glad to see everybody working together and working hard to make it a pleasant experience. This is a beautiful town we live in, and we're going to spend our days here. So we want it to be a nice place to continue to live. So thank you all for working hard on our behalf.
Thank you, MJ. Any other attendees who wish to speak? All right, Jamie, why don't you, there are 4 issues that Elizabeth Scott brought up. Lighting, parking increase 5%, notice to neighborhoods, and parking management plan and alternative transportation.
Right. Madam Chair, with regards to lighting, again, any plan that the hospital were submitting with regards to their master plan, again, we will be looking for that dark sky compliant lumens plan associated with that. I think the hospital has stated in their prior master plan submittal process, as well as this application for regulatory changes, that they are committed in the near term to address lighting on the campus and have it as part of their capital improvement plan. I believe Mr. Prescott may be able to speak to that further. With regards to the discussion of town farm, the town farm parcel, the master plan submittal requires them to include all of their holdings and or anything they anticipate on acquiring. If they do their master plan and it does not include town farm, and they then acquire town farm, they will be required to amend their master plan because it was not defined as part of their campus. The master plan has to identify what their campus is. Town farm's not in it, then the master plan that the planning board is contemplating is the limit of the campus as defined in that process. If town farm is in that master plan, then that can be considered part of the campus. So I don't see how, it's really the hospital's choice and how they want to proceed with that. But I believe very confidently that the planning board will be able to look at that aspect as it relates to reviewing the master plan. The other one with regards to the neighborhood meeting, I think Liz initially testified that it was only the abutters. It in fact is the perimeter of the property as defined as their campus, and anyone who resides within 200 feet of that, and in essence touches that circum linear line around the campus. Again, in some aspects, our regulations go to 500 feet. Perhaps you have a tiered layer that the 200 feet is certified or return receipt, and the other is just a regular United States postal mailing. And again, we can easily provide those mailing labels, and the hospital can print those off our GIS system. The 5th one with regards to global warming and climate change. Again, the master plan as it relates to parking requires them to contemplate all means necessary to reduce their parking needs and deal with their parking requirements. That entire section is intended to allow the hospital to better manage their parking versus just trying to meet a hard requirement based on a square footage calculation included in an ITE manual, and really address the utilization of the hospital's parking as it relates to a 24-hour operation. And those are the 4 items. Again, Ellie, Nordzy supported perhaps a 500-foot notice versus 200, and actually had the suggestion of perhaps a two-tiered notice with regards to one more hard notice with return receipt or certification that they were mailed, and then the second aspect of perhaps just being a mailing. And then Susan Benson supported Liz's work. And again, I think the hospital's aware that lighting is an issue, and I believe it's my understanding that they are prepared to address it in the near term.
That's correct.
Thanks, Jamie. Thoughts from board members? Certainly, I think the two-tiered approach would be appropriate, given the fact that this is an institutional use, and having the 200-foot be certified mail and the remaining up to 500 feet be USPS seems to me to be a good idea. Also, I certainly understand the concerns about seasonal landscape materials. It's something we always try to be really aware of with landscaping plans in particularly commercial projects, that deciduous plantings do not have the necessary effect if you're looking to buffer certain types of uses or lighting. And that's probably at least 6 months of the year. So I thought that was a good comment, and there may be a way to clarify that somehow. Thoughts from board members? Paul?
Yeah, I would just be in agreement on the 500-foot buffer. I think that's a good idea. And I think the two-tiered idea is fine. I think the point is not to prove that the hospital did it. I think we know that they do it. It's to make sure that everybody that wants to get to the meeting gets to the meeting. So I think that's a great idea.
Thanks. Susan?
I'd like to follow that and say I agree, but we have a 7-day notice, which I assume also wraps around weekends. If we're using old-fashioned snail mail to reach more people, could we add a few days to that notification period so we can ensure that everyone does receive that piece of mail in time to get to that meeting?
Good idea, Susan. And I have a question for, I guess it's Jamie and also Mr. Prescott, Mr. Revens. You know, it's unfortunate that still in this day and age, we have to refer to biking and walking as alternative modes of transportation. But nonetheless, I think it's important that we try to either add language or get some kind of commitment from the hospital that their analysis will not be limited to the old school autocentric mindset. I don't know how best to do this, so perhaps Mr. Revens is smiling. Perhaps there's some ideas floating around there. Josh.
I don't want to jump in if you are hoping for anyone to answer that. I agree with that point. I'd love to see that in some way incorporated. I also agree with the 500-foot and two-tier approach. I think it makes sense to make sure as many people in the neighborhood, which is a larger space than the immediate, are aware of and able to participate. I also had a question on, I thought your point, Maria, was great about the plantings and about, you know, to the comments that were made in the community about, you know, if you drive through there in the winter. I used to live over in the neighborhood and I remember that well. And so I wanted to ask a follow-up question of the hospital now in terms of, Jamie, you talked about the near term, the hospital is looking to address that. Could we talk about what the near term means? Maybe the hospital, someone from the hospital can answer to what the near term.
Well, if I could try to address that, the near term would be after the amended ordinance is enacted and after the master plan has been submitted and vetted and approved. That plan would have the schedule of when the hospital intends to make the different improvements that are set forth in the master plan. Generally speaking, the lighting is at the top of the hospital's list once we get to that point of the ordinance being adopted and the master plan being prepared, vetted, and approved. If that's helpful.
That is helpful. Another follow-up question to Jamie. You've talked about, future language about the dark sky compliant lighting. Is that language that would be new, or has that been in previous language? And so is sort of what exists grandfathered in because it hasn't been in that language?
Good question, Josh.
Yeah, Josh, from a regulatory standpoint, if the hospital is proposing to replace, they need to replace in a compliant manner. But if they are just leaving a pole, that pole in essence is existing non-conforming and grandfathered. Again, discussions with the hospital is that those older non-energy efficient light standards and poles and fixtures need to be replaced, and they have programmed their replacement. So any replacement would be done in a code compliant manner.
To add on to Josh's question about the timing of this, Mr. Revens and or Mr. Prescott, can you give us an idea of what you think the time frame might be once the language is approved? How soon might the master plan be ready? That we'd have an idea of what we're talking about.
We had that discussion, Madam Chair, this past week. Mr. Prescott and I and other administrators at the hospital, and they made a decision to authorize one of the executives at the hospital to engage a professional to assist them in preparing that plan. And they've started that process to engage the person in the hope that the ordinance will be enacted. But we have to engage someone to help us with that so that we submit a plan that conforms fully and completely to the institutional master plan ordinance that's ultimately enacted by the town. So,
okay, that doesn't give us any kind of reference for time.
No, I understand that, but you got to, as you know, Madam Chair, you've been serving on this board for many, many years. You have to find someone who's available. They have a list of more than one person, which they have. Then you have to see if that person or entity company is available, and then what their schedule is as to when they can get you in the queue. So that's why I'm not giving you a precise answer, because it won't be my work or yours.
Yeah.
It's going to be someone else's. So if we can get someone engaged to do it, then the next issue is, do they perform it in the time frame that they give you? And in this current environment, I don't want to give you an answer that's the wrong answer. Maybe we'll have a little more detail when we get to the public hearing as to whether we've engaged someone and what they give us as their estimate to present us with the draft master plan. But I would think a conservative number from today, it's not going to be less than probably 90 days from today. But I don't know, and I wish I could, other than the hospital's giving it its full attention, and they've already started the process of bringing someone in to help with that.
Thank you. You're correct. It's a good time to be a consultant, isn't it?
It really is.
Susan, you look like you were on the verge of a question or comment.
Well, I'm beating my old battered drum here about that lighting. Sorry, Mr. Revens.
That's
We've had a
perfectly
neighbor
fine.
call tonight and said she's looking at her back window at 5 lights shining in her windows. And your report that came out last spring noted that some of these fixtures are simply broken. Do you not have a handy guy and a ladder to just go out and straighten this out before we go through this whole process? I think it's low hanging fruit and it's goodwill to the neighbors, and the lights are still shining in their windows. And
Well-
I get that we have a process and we're trying to get through our master plan and paperwork. Can't we just flip those lights around so they're not shining in people's bedroom windows and just, it's a Tuesday afternoon with a good ladder and can we just not fix this for the folks in the neighborhood?
If it was that easy, and I don't mean to be disagreeable, they would have done that a long time ago. But I'll certainly, and the hospital's general counsel will certainly take that back, but it's not as simple as climbing up a ladder and putting in a new bulb or adding a deflector. I don't know. That's not my field of expertise. All I can say is for a long time now, we've been saying to you very openly that it's a top priority of the hospital as part of this early phases of the implementation of the changes to redo that lighting. So as soon as it's the same thing with that. You have to design the lighting. You have to hire a contractor. You can't just go out and stick a couple of metal shields up there and that's going to fix this. And they're going to have a modern lighting system there as soon as we can get through this process and get a master plan and get it designed and get it bid out and then get a contractor to get the equipment and come in and install it. But today, that process is brutal. And these poles they're not like 8 feet high that you can just climb up on a step ladder. You can't lean a ladder against a pole. But I'll bring it to their attention. I'm not the lighting person, and we want to get this done. I'm acutely aware, as is the hospital, that one of the major neighborhood complaints, and it's a totally legitimate complaint, is about the lighting. So it's important to my client to fix it and do it correctly. And as Jamie said, the new systems now are all dark sky compliant, which means if you're looking out your window, you'll still see the lighting and you'll still see the brightness of that campus lighting, but that light won't be shedding across our property, across the street, across your lawn and into your windows. But if you stand at the window and you look out the window at the hospital, you're still going to see lights, but that lighting won't extend, those beams won't extend onto your land. If I'm describing that properly to you, and I'm trying to do that, but there's a difference between seeing the lights and having the light actually piercing your window and providing illumination inside your home from the hospital campus. That will not happen in the new lighting. And I'll certainly ask them, and if there's anything they can do temporarily, we'd certainly be happy to take a look at that. But I don't know that that's that easy. You can't just attach things to old lighting fixtures that easily. They weren't designed to be like dark sky compliant because that terminology didn't exist when these lights were installed years ago, as you know. But
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Yeah, and
we're
the
trying to
only
get this
thing,
done. I wish we weren't here talking about it as much as you do. I wish we had it done because
Yeah.
it's a big issue for the neighbors, and it's a legit issue. They're right about it. It's old-fashioned lighting, and it's annoying.
Mr.
Thank you.
Prescott?
the only thing what I would add, and please understand that I'm relatively new to the hospital, but I don't know if the specific people who have reached out to member Axelrod or others recently have communicated directly with the hospital and provided specific information about which specific lights, appear to be problematic. If that hasn't happened recently, I would certainly encourage direct communication so that at least we're informed about, who's concerned and which particular lights are at issue. And Jack's right. If if the problem is they're just older lights, we really need to wait until we get the ordinance approved and the plan in place. But if something's broken, that may be a very different situation.
Thank you, Mr.
Susan.
Prescott. I would just like to clarify that I've never had a conversation with any neighbors or anybody else about lighting. All the communications I've had have been during these public meetings. but you did release a report last, I want to say late spring, that did an evaluation of your own facilities. And that's where broken lights were noted, was in your evaluation of your own facilities. There hasn't been communication, at least between me and any neighbors, about this property.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Prescott and Mr. Revens. I certainly agree. I'm sure the board agrees as a whole with Susan's comments and the neighborhood concerns. Any kind of creativity with regard to temporarily correcting the situation would be greatly appreciated, number one. And number two, your suggestion for the neighbors to directly connect with the hospital, is there a specific person that they should reach out to? Because I'm sure, being such a large institution, there are many departments, and allowing them to focus on the appropriate person or department might be very useful.
Yeah, I would suggest that people reach out to David Fontes, Fontes. I don't have his title in front of me, but essentially he's the director of facilities. And I can provide to the board his contact information so that it can be made available to anybody who wants to reach out and make him aware of issues.
Thank you. Joe, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, but I took it down because you asked the question. I was also going to ask for a contact person.
Great. And Mr. Prescott,
Madam Chair, you have.
Yes, follow up with that would also be helpful. Perhaps you can get back to staff with regard to contact information for the director of facilities. There is. Go ahead, Jamie. Oh, Josh.
So I know, first I want to preface it by saying, I appreciate the productivity of this process, with the hospital and the board and the neighbors bringing a lot of really good thoughts and questions, and I feel like we've moved forward well. So I want to preface it with that. This is kind of the 11th hour to say this sort of thing. I'm recalling that the beginnings of this conversation really came out of as I understood it, a desire by the hospital to be able to be agile, nimble, responsive. And so it's sort of funny to hear, the response to neighbors who are looking for something more, responsive, agile, nimble in terms of lighting is, well, we have to go through this process. So maybe it makes me sort of wonder, and I think what we've done is good. So I don't want to throw, any wrenches in the gears. Makes me wonder if there are particular, issues that might be identified outside of the master planning process that are recognized as priorities for the hospital, the town, and the neighbors, where there may be I don't know if there's a fast tracking process or something, that maybe that gets to some sort of a win-win for everybody when there are things, because what I'm hearing from the hospital now is, we want to do this, we want to do it, know it's a problem, but we have to go through all of these processes. I think the start of this conversation was, how can we make this more agile, nimble, responsive, not onerous? I'd love to see that happen, especially when it's shared interests of the hospital, the town, and the neighbors. So just put that out there. I know it's the 11th hour to say that sort of thing, but I don't know if it stimulates some thoughts.
Thanks, Josh. That's exactly what I was thinking when I said perhaps some kind of creative thinking could go into making this happen. Perhaps there can be a contract with an independent person to make some corrections prior to the larger contract with a lighting consultant. Again, just thinking of ways to make this actually happen, and the goodwill is of such great value. Anything else from anyone? Anything to wrap up, Mr. Revens or Mr. Prescott? Thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work in this. We have come such a long way. This is a very good example of a community working together with an institution and with the neighbors and with the planning board and department. So we will, Jamie, I am assuming you will make the necessary minor modifications to the language, and we will have this at our next regular meeting.
Yes, Madam Chair, our intent would be to review the notes and discussion tonight, have a follow-up discussion with the hospital, and prepare a draft motion based on the discussion tonight in a favorable manner for your consideration at your regularly scheduled meeting in February.
Thanks, Jamie. I think that's what we were all after. Again, thanks everyone for your time and efforts with this project. Let us move on then to our next agenda item, which is the South Kingstown Home Style Project discussion of missing middle housing types.
So, Madam Chair, as the meeting was started, just to let the planning board members know that I do have a Word document that I'm going to put up on the screen in a moment. I did email that to the membership. I also have a couple of PowerPoint slides to review. So you just bear with me. I'm going to pull up the document. And can everyone see? Probably can't. Can you see that screen right now?
Not yet.
All right, let's try this again. Okay, is that a little bit better? Now
Yes,
can we see
we
all
can
of them?
see it. Yes.
Okay, so Madam Chair, with regards to the data that Horsley Witten has submitted, as well as Union Studios, the second aspect of the missing middle that is subject to discussion is the townhouse, manor house, and village apartment regulations. We do have some elevations that were provided by Union Studios and some cross sections, as well as some dimensional language that was provided in consultation with Jeff Davis and Horsley Witten. It's intended to be a series of bulletins. The cottage regulations were bulletin and design guidelines 1. This is intended to be bulletin number 2. I have kind of a 2-page mark of this. Here's where you would see the dimensional requirements for the townhouses, that cross section, as well as the regulatory requirements of 2.5 stories, 40 feet, the lot size, the unit area required, front facade width, primary roof pitch, other roof pitches, roof span, and then dormer length, in order to articulate that architectural elevation that's shown in the pretty pictures. I'm just going to leave this page for a moment and go to the actual document. So here we have the actual text associated with this, and I'm just going to walk through the styles of housing for the moment. And they're seen starting on page 5. And we just took a quick look at the townhouses. I'll just enlarge that a little bit. So again, the townhouses typically has a minimum and maximum width to the townhouse, minimum and maximum square footage, and it's intended to be this 4 to 6 unit massing for buildings. The second aspect to the discussion is the manor home. That's intended to be that larger single family, large home appearance that could contain 3 to 4 units. And that's in rendering of what a typical building could look like as far as a mansion house. The next aspect, which is on page 7, is looking at the village apartment, which would be a 2.5-story building. And we have a sample of the elevation associated with that. One thing that I'm sure will be a subject of discussion tonight is all of these buildings look wonderful as an independent building on an independent lot. And I think the concern that the planning board has shared as we went through our discussions on missing middle and how development relates to a lot in a neighborhood is what happens when you have 10 of these village style apartments that are identical to each other all on one lot. And I think the challenge that we have in our work with Union Studios is I want to take a few pieces of land within the community and with permission of the ownership of those lots, show what a cottage development would look like on that lot, what a townhouse development would look like on that lot, what a village apartment complex would look like on that lot, and what a mansion home development would look like on that lot. So again, can you fit 16 cottages, and then you can fit 4 townhouses, and then 5 mansion homes, and then 4 village apartments, which relate to all different types of density that have similar demands on parking, so you can see the different styles. And then if you start placing multiple units within a parcel, how do you vary the architecture or the style of the buildings so they don't look like a large apartment complex? I'll use that reference in Warwick or East Greenwich or North Providence or East Providence, and look more attuned to the development that you're used to in South Kingstown. And I think that's the challenge on the architectural side. And then the ability to articulate in a written code to drive the product during an application process. And I'm gonna go back to the density aspect because we have a table for that. I'll just reduce this a little bit. So again, here's the table with regards to townhouse, manor homes, village apartments. Townhouses, you're looking at 2.5 stories or 40 feet, the same with a manor house and the same with the village apartment. The unit areas for a townhouse are a little bit larger at 2,000 square feet, with the manor house and village apartments running at 1,200 square feet. The gross floor area, we didn't have a minimum for the townhouses. There was a maximum on the manor of 5,000 square feet for footprint and 10,000 square feet for a village apartment. Ground story area, you'll see those. Front facade for a townhouse, you had 16 feet and 30 feet per unit. And for a manor house, 20 and 50 and 40 and 70 for village. See the roof pitches are more consistent with the roof pitches you'll see on a typical gable structure of an 8-12 roof. with some other variations of 412. Anything below a 412 actually requires a membrane type structure, so it's much flatter. And then limiting the roof span, so they can't be large boxy buildings. And also the dormer length that's required along the roof line, so you'll have variations in those. I didn't want to, again, we're throwing a lot at you tonight. I can walk you through everything, or I'll open the comments right now on how you would like to proceed.
Joe,
Jamie, I didn't quite understand when you had the density there as far as which zoning districts they'd be allowed. So if you go back to that chart and you have the manor house or said per underlying zoning, I don't know exactly what it said, but what zoning districts would that, so it says per underlying zoning per building. So what zoning districts would that be allowed in? What is being proposed?
So right now, we haven't really looked at which districts. I think it's a discussion to start to broach with the planning board of town. And to me, the townhouses are still in your villages, your R10s and your R20s, your village apartments and your R10s and your R20s, and along your state routes. And there's probably some areas of 108 and Tower Hill that they would be appropriate for.
So I'm trying to understand it. I'm not saying on the townhouse where it says per underlying zoning for each set up to 6 units. Does that mean if you were in a R10 and you had 6 units, you
Yes, sorry, I misunderstood your question, Joe. So yes,
have to have 60,000 square feet, or?
Yes. So
Yes.
if you were in an R10, you could do a townhouse with 6 units.
But you would have to have a lot that was currently at 60,000 square feet, 10,000 square feet per unit.
No, so it would be 6 units on a 10,000 square foot lot.
Okay. All right, so I was just trying to understand what your intention is.
Yep.
So in the manor house, which was 3 or 4 units, I think you said, per underlying zoning per building. So what you're saying is that, let's say we, as a board, decided they were appropriate in R20, and then that manor house with 3 or 4 units could be built on a 20,000 square foot lot. Is that?
Yes.
That's how the word. All right, I was trying to understand how that. Got it.
And then the same thing, the village apartments would be the underlying zone plus 50%. So again, and we'll look closely at these, and I have a good idea of where the planning board sits with regards to the townhouses and the village apartments. I'm a little less clear on whether a manor house may be appropriate in an R30, R40, or even an R80 zone. If someone had a 2-acre lot or a 4-acre lot in a more suburban rural setting, would it be appropriate for someone to do a 3-unit home in a manor style, architectural form and density? So it would read larger single-family home. The primary difference would be your parking demand.
Okay.
Paul, you have your hand up?
Yeah, thank you. Paul Jordan, I'm just curious about the amount of available land. We say if we were to limit it to R10, R20, do we have a sense of how much R10, R20 buildable land is available in town for this sort of thing?
Well, not offhand, but that is a good question, and we can provide you with how much acreage is within the R10 and how many lots, and we perhaps can tell you how many vacant lots are within that. We can do that analysis.
Thank you.
And Jamie, to add on to that, I know that we have in the past, particularly when talking about potential for Old Tower Hill Road, talked about having a kind of special zone or overlay or floating zone that would allow for more mixed use in what is currently commercial highway. So it seems as though it would be useful to have some of that information as well. And I'm not certain when the last time a build out analysis was done, but that would be helpful to the board as well.
No,
Other-
Madam Chair, we
Yeah.
we did do analysis when we prepared the comprehensive community plan. I can look at how current that data would be to this discussion.
Thanks, Jamie. The other thing I was going to ask about was the views that you have shown, other than the smaller images early on. It would be helpful to look at these different types of housing from a more of a streetscape view, because you can see this is an aerial view. You're looking down on it. It doesn't necessarily show you the mass and scale. I'm assuming that that tree is meant to be a mature tree, which means it's 20 to 30 feet high. And it would be helpful for our discussions to have a more human scale view of how these buildings actually look when you are walking along the sidewalk or driving by. And I completely understand your comment, Jamie, about we don't want multiple versions of the same type of housing so that it looks like the multifamily version of Levittown. So I think we need to have more opportunity to look at how these would fit in, both in a new situation or an infill situation. And then, is the term manor house an actual architectural term for a type of house, or is this something that just came from Union Studios? I'm just thinking,
Now,
you know, it doesn't sound particularly equitable, the term. So a little thing, but
manor home is a form and style of building, giving
Okay.
it scale. Manor home may be a little more southern in relationship to what you would consider a mansion home or a state home in the Northeast. So,
thanks.
okay, if we have a slightly different term where it's a manor home or a mansion style, a state style home.
We could probably come up with an appropriate New England term also, right?
Yes. What I did is just on sharing screen, when Horsley Witten did some of their analysis, they did look at, with regards to a what you would consider a larger mansion, a state home or manor home. These are some of the photographs of those homes that exist within the town from the street view. You know,
That's
I would
helpful.
the first one in the top left corner is perhaps more appropriate for the discussion than the next one in the middle of a page.
Mhm.
I'm sure the planning board members wouldn't be too happy if your planning director brought the middle home as a brand new project.
Thanks, Jamie.
Versus the architectural bottom left.
That's helpful, definitely helpful. Josh?
So, these are street views.
So I have a question. I don't know if it's I'll just ask it. I really appreciate this, seeing this and thinking through this and the work that you've put into it. I'm wondering about how this, or if this, relates to existing large single-family homes that could be adapted into different situations. Is that out of left field, or any thoughts or questions on them?
No, Josh, again, Jamie Rabbit, Planning Director, with regards to your comment, this would allow, in essence, new construction and or the ability to retrofit an existing. I think an important component in the retrofit and we have seen it, is the incorporation of that exterior stairwell. That in my view should not be a pressure treated stairwell above an L on the back that makes it look more like an apartment complex setting in an urban area as a retrofit. But if there is a second floor apartment, that stairwell or that emergency access is done as an architectural element added to the structure. And I think we've all seen the poor examples of someone who's added that second story apartment, needed an emergency egress, and they built a 3-story tall, pressure treated 4x4 exterior stairwell that takes away from that single family look and just really flags the property as an apartment building.
Is there, I'm just looking through this now and it's very thorough, but is there language in this about the retrofit side of things and what you're talking about there? You know, the sort of.
We haven't
guidance on
specifically,
retrofit?
Josh, we haven't pulled that out specifically, but you do make a good point. I have written that in other communities in order to address that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. Joe?
Jamie, maybe something just to think about. I don't know how hard this will be to incorporate, but maybe if you give some thought to the different number of bedrooms and how that fits into the different style of houses. Right now, it almost appears that, you know, it's all based on a 2-bedroom. We talk about a manor house, talk about 1,200 square feet and the townhouses. I mean, I'd like to see if it's possible to give some encouragement for the development of a range of sizes. So both the 1-bedroom and the 3-bedroom, and maybe it's, you know, some wording that allows maybe a little bit more additional units if there's smaller apartments. So it'd be good if we could maybe give that some thought and see if somehow that can be worked in. You know, I see it all the time because I own a lot of apartments, and there's a big demand for the some of the aging population for 1-bedroom places, and they can't necessarily afford a 2-bedroom. And where we could get a few more units and not necessarily change the look at the structure or the amount of parking that's required. It's just something I think is worth giving some thought to.
Joe, again, you make a good point, and this is why we're having this discussion, is that most regulations are kind of in the realm of unit density, not bedroom density. And maybe that's something we have to look at, that you know, is there a difference between a 5-unit project with 2 bedrooms each for a total count of 10 bedrooms versus a 10-unit project that only has 1 bedroom each for a total of 10 units? And I'll talk to Jeff Davis and Union Studios and try and get their thoughts on that.
And that certainly comes into consideration when we start thinking about what infrastructure is required and sewage and such. You know, doing a 4-unit with 3 bedrooms each is a 12 bedrooms is a pretty hefty design. And matter of fact, it only be done by a class 3 versus 4 units with 1 bedroom, which would only be 4-bedroom design, which could be done by a class 2 or a class 3 designer. And it's a much more modest septic system. So when we talk about infrastructure, that also comes into play, and which zoning districts these would be allowed in.
Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to say, I just emailed Jay and Jamie a photo of something that looks very much like this townhouse over on Route 2 near Kenyon Industries. In fact, I think I sent this picture to Jamie sometime last summer. Sometime last summer. I just think it's interesting. It's actually sort of it seems like an odd location for the size of the building, but I do like the way it looks. I don't know if Jay, if you have a chance to pull that up and share it or not.
Bear with me, I can pull it up. So Paul, again, I think the discussion from my perspective is, you have 3 identical units. Is their
Right.
ability to slightly modify the architecture so it looks more like a community versus 3 identical units. It looks like there's a slight variation in color though, Paul.
Compared to what was there before, this is huge. I don't know if anybody knows the site, but this is a big change.
You know, and with something like new construction, there's not necessarily, depending on the lot, a reason why these buildings should be in a straight line. They could be configured around a central green space.
In this particular case, these are the ones I think on Route 2. These are the ones that there was old houses there and they renovated them. So,
Yes.
Joe, did you have something else?
nope, that's it.
And I do think that making the case for retrofitting is really important. The expression that the greenest building is one that's already there, despite the practitioners of LEED certification and so on. And I think that we need to find a way to, if possible, incentivize that kind of thing, because we know we've been told so many times that it's more expensive to do so, but in the long run, it can make a lot of sense. Josh?
Yeah, when you're saying that, I felt like I've been wondering, this might be a little more out of left field, but it's certainly related to the conversation. And as you said that, it felt like it teed me up for it. So I'm going to say it. So I had a really, really fascinating conversation with a friend of mine who's a developer who's looking at really interesting things around missing middle, the kinds of conversations that we're having. And he clued me into 2 really fascinating organizations. So, thinking big picture, the work that we're doing here to think about planning and zoning is one element to the kind of changes that we're needing. And the other elements are, a different type of financing and then a different type of developer. So he was pointing to 2 organizations. One's called the Incremental Development Alliance, and the other one is called Building Community Value. That one's in Detroit. And they both do education programs for basically democratizing development, developers. If you look at the demographic of developers, with no offense meant to anyone, it tends toward a certain gender and it tends toward a certain race. And it tends toward a certain type of project because there's a certain financial structure behind who gets into it. So I think there's ways of thinking also creatively about how we support a certain type of development, both through zoning and planning, but then also through who we sort of help to become developers, and what sort of financing structures we put in place for that too. There's been, people have floated the idea of a village trust or things like that, other types of ways of financing. And oftentimes those smaller developers, may have more ties to the community, may be interested in smaller projects, more incremental, more infill types of things that larger developers might say, that's not worth it to me. I can't make a bundle off of that. So it was such a fascinating conversation, and I wanted to share that, hoping that it resonates and maybe spurs on some good thinking among the group.
Thanks, Josh. Just like the Habitat with Humanity project. And can you give us the names again? There was Incremental Building Alliance.
Incremental Development Alliance is one of the
Alliance.
organizations.
Okay.
And the other one is called Building Community Value. And that one, if you look up either of those things, Building Community Values in Detroit. So you might look up Building Community Value Detroit.
Madam Chair, to Josh's point, I'm not sure he was on the planning board yet when we had some of our initial discussions. And I talked to the planning board about investment by locals in articulating your goals and objectives of the communities. That can you take a developer who normally does, 2 single-family homes a year and teach him and train him that perhaps you can do 2 duplexes a year versus 2 single-family homes in a style and manner that makes you successful. And then if you can do 2 duplexes per year, can you potentially tackle a 3-family? And then if you do a few 3 families, then maybe you're ready to tackle a project that has 3 families, or it has 2 townhouses on it. And training your internal workforce and development pool to try and help articulate your vision versus just having an outside developer from 2 states over come in and do the normal thing of a traditional 20-lot subdivision, or just come in and want to do 4 stacked flats on a 5-acre piece and drop down 200 units. So Josh, to your point, we have had that discussion over the last 12 to 18 months. And again, thank you for reminding me not to lose some of that foresight that we had talked about earlier on.
I'll say, just to follow up, the friend that I was talking to, I won't say, works for a well-known development firm in the northern part of the state, and is interested himself in replicating this. The model of those 2 organizations that I talked about is a cohort educational model, to your point, Jamie, of how can we, sort of spur this on through education. It's those 2 organizations do a cohort educational model. So a friend of mine is looking to replicate that here in Rhode Island.
Josh, both what you and Jamie have just said is so spot on. There is board members may be aware that there is a General Assembly House Commission looking at low mod housing and trying to find creative ways to do things differently, which we certainly need. But it seems to me that it would be so worthwhile to have a statewide conference, in particular with the money, not only money that has come in via ARPA, but money that the governor has said will go to affordable housing, and bring in people from different parts of the country, similar to what when Roger Williams University several years ago did a marine law symposium. They brought in people from all over the country relating to sea level rise, but it wasn't just the scientists and the planners. It was the real estate folks and the banking people and the insurance people. And this is really the time to have something like this that could bring everybody in, that would be open and very inexpensive to volunteer board members, to developers, to anyone who's interested, both the for-profit and nonprofit, and any other entities that are involved in housing. And of course, always at the forefront, the planners who see the big picture and realize how everything is connected. But this would really be an opportune time to have something like that happen. Any other thoughts on this initial portion of Jamie's presentation? Jamie, continue on.
Okay, so with that, not hearing any questions, I'll continue to work with Union Studios, give Jeff Davis some feedback, and we'll look at a couple of points tonight. Street view elevations, trying to make a few of these land on actual parcels, even from a dimensional aspect. We won't, you could use a primary one that's before the planning board right now, but you look at Holly Street, relatively rectangular piece of land. It has city water, city sewer. It could be manor homes, townhouses, village apartments, or it could be a cottage development. The developer's already chosen a path with regards to those duplexes. But if we have another piece like that, whether it's occupied or vacant, that has a relationship to a surrounding built environment, I think we can try and put a real world perspective on how this relate to South Kingstown. and not just be a completely arbitrary discussion, but try and bring it to life into a real life setting. I'll work with them on that and coordinate with Maria as your chair to look at sites that we could potentially apply these to. So to Joe's point, and you ask, what does this really look like? What is the infill? How does it get built? We can point to some real activity and real parcels that this could be applied to.
Thanks, Jamie. That would be great. South Kingstown has always been, well, for many years at the forefront of being creative and good planning. And although we may have had some projects that beyond our control that didn't have the outcome we had hoped for, we certainly want to create a method in which we can ensure good outcomes, and both for new sites and for infill as well.
Madam Chair, we do have 9. I just noticed my
Oh.
clock tick 9 o'clock. So
Yes.
I'm going to just move the work program.
Certainly.
Introduce that, and then we'll send that out in all the memberships and go from there. So I
And
will,
Jamie, before you start, we have to find a way for our work sessions to not get, I hate to use the word hijacked, but our work sessions end up not being as productive as they could be because we have all these other things on our plate and they get dumped into our work sessions, and we have to try to do better with that. And I know it's not your problem if an applicant isn't prepared or asks for multiple extensions, but just.
correct. We did
thinking out
lose
loud.
90 minutes today,
Yep.
and that's, I'm throwing a lot at you with the anticipation that we'll pick this discussion up at next month's work session, where these will be the only items on the agenda, if we can control that.
Yeah, you say that now, but
It's all Jay Parker's fault. He controls the permitting agenda items. So I'm throwing Jay under the bus tonight. He's going to say he prepares them and I approve them. So.
Sorry,
it
I really wasn't paying attention. Did you say something about the efficiency of the way staff?
Oh my.
So let me share my screen again, and we'll get over to work program. Can everybody see that complete screen? I just have part of it blocked off with my Hollywood squares on the right.
Yes, I think we do as well.
So what I did is, in talking with the chair and Maria and I looking at work program, I went back and looked at what we had for 2020 and 2021, compared that again following through the 2021, and then look at how we're moving into 2022. I'm just going to go briefly on 2020. We had objectives of finalizing the comprehensive community plan, initiate the cottage zoning ordinance, complete the accessory dwelling unit regulations. In 2021, we wanted to tackle farm and accessory events, upgrade landscape regulations, work on Horsley Witten, introduce design standards, work on Saugatucket, work on circulation and traffic, stormwater design, Route 1 stewardship, West Kingston, Route 108 Special Management District, and a few of the list items go on. And as we carry that forward to the what we did in 2020 and what we did in 2021 is we completed the comprehensive community plan. We did develop cottage regulations. We did complete the accessory dwelling unit regulations with Brian Wagner's assistant in the housing collaborative also helping on that. farm accessory events, which was really initiated by Lavender Ways Farm. That is ongoing, but has, we'll say, I use the term low priority, but it has moved to the bottom of the pile, given our workload. With regards to upgrading the landscape regulations, that's kind of in the middle of the pile or in the queue. We've had some brief conversations with Rich Bourbonnais on those changes. The Horsley Witten study is ongoing. We continue that discussion tonight. With regards to Tower Hill Road, the planning board is aware that we applied for a grant from Rhode Island Commerce of $125,000. We also have some capital monies from this fiscal year and some that should be available coming July 1. So we may be able to tackle that even if the grant isn't successful. Architectural design standards. Again, I have some consulting fees available to me this fiscal year. So I would like to do an RFP or RFQ in the next, say 4 to 8 weeks, and have that hit the street to bring a consultant on to start that discussion and a formulation of design standards and what that will comprise for the town. Saugatucket, that was just the subject of a joint work session. Some of the outtakes of that work session were seek additional funding opportunities, look at some of the SNAP grant work, maybe the American Rescue Plan monies, if it's not specific to the town's funds that are presently allocated, that there may be additional ARPA monies available from the state or federal government. Traffic and circulation, kind of have that on the shelf right now. Stormwater design, I just have the note of on the shelf, but that's probably in the middle of the pile right now. Route 1 stewardship, which was on the agenda last year, that committee has been meeting, but we don't have any text yet. West Kingston and the Amtrak area on Route 138, we have some of that ARPA money potentially targeted for that area. And then the Route 108 Special Management District, we may be able to undertake some of those design guidelines and incorporate them into that 108 corridor. Or again, they'll have a tie-in or correlation to that. Coming up in 2002, coming into this spring and summer, design guidelines, again, RFQ, RFP, and continue that discussion that we've started with some of our visioning and architectural workshops, looking at stormwater management and any upgrades we need to our subdivision regulations, tracking affordable housing as it goes through the state legislature, where we need to be with farm events, where we need to be with Old Tower Hill and our grant application and design guidelines. Horsley Witten in the missing middle. We're in that middle of the missing middle with regards to village apartments, townhouses, and manor homes. The next there, which I've talked to Jeff Davis about moving on to currently, is the mixed use component, which is the last aspect of that, along with the larger stacked flats. Subdivision and zoning regulations and review with regards to inconsistencies. We may have some staff time. Brian Parker within our department is in the process of wrapping up the harbor management plan. So we may have some staff hours available to work on that internally, along with landscape regulations update. There was some discussion about main streets and how we address those. Town council has approved a spend plan right now that targets almost $5 million to South Kingston's main streets, primarily being West Kingston, Peacedale, Wakefield, and portions of Matunic. How those are appropriated are yet to be determined. We are working on possibly bringing in a consultant in the form of Weston and Sampson, who has partnered with 2 additional consultants on the financial management and grant administrating side, with Union Studios on the architectural side. That will be brought up again at Town Council on Monday night. They've asked for additional information. One of the other items that could be out there on the horizon are looking at our conservation subdivision regulations and how those have affected development in town, and whether there are any unintended outcomes from those regulations, and whether we need to reevaluate any changes to those regulations. A couple other bullet items: complete streets, build out analysis, climate change, scenic roadway plans, tree program, greenway master plan, TRC, audiovisual tech, growth bar, public engagement and outreach, board education, and integrated information kind of among the public, planning board members and staff. It's a pretty comprehensive list. I'd like you to take a look at it, see if you can kind of prioritize maybe a 1, 2, 3, or 4 next to it. And if you can, again, we will distribute this. I'll probably have it in a form where you can put a 1, 2, 3, or 4 next to the items and then further discuss it. Some of the challenges are, is we are a department of 5. We have a dedicated GIS person, 3 planners, and then a planning associate. I don't need to tell you about our workload on the permitting side. We're fairly committed to providing you the level of service that hopefully you grow to appreciate and expect from us, which leaves a little bit of time for other things that the department can take on. But I also have dual roles with regards to supporting the town manager's office on economic development and American Rescue Plan funds. So that's taking some considerable time away from just supporting you, as well as providing support for a potential new emergency management facility in the southwestern portion of town. So we're also looking at our availability of consulting monies and capital funds to bring on consultants and try and tick some of these items off. If we bring on a consultant, we can be targeted with regards to expertise. We can also hold those consultants to timeframes and deliverables where we can raise our voices with them if they deviate from the time frame, whereas it's more difficult to ask Jay why he hasn't finished subdivision regulations when I know what his permit load is and managing just the application. So when we're heavy on the application side, the studies slip a little bit. That's my 12-minute dissertation on work program.
Thanks, Jamie. I just, just wanted to mention that, planning in general sometimes gets criticized in terms of consultants, but as was discussed earlier on this evening, there are a limited number of consulting firms out there, and we don't always control the timeframes. Obviously, they're of great value to us, as they should be, given the expense. But I think everyone needs to understand from a practical perspective that these kinds of things don't happen overnight with regard to the consulting firms. And the other thing I just wanted to clarify is that conservation subdivisions are not the same as what we have in our regs. We have the FDRP, but conservation subdivisions have been, and it's an old name. It's currently being revised. It's probably 10 years old. In some communities have this, which is, I would say, a better version of what our FDRP regulations aspire to be. And I know that they are currently being revised. I know that the town of Charlestown is working with a consultant to revise them, but it's something that is very much related to the work that we did with Healthy Places by Design. and something that we should look at as another type of housing subdivision choice that we could add to our toolbox at the appropriate time.
Yeah. Maria, are you going back to Rural by Design and Randall Arendt's work on conservation subdivisions as
It's
the file?
it's beyond Randall's work. There was some work done in Exeter and work by the state and statewide planning. I think certainly using his work as kind of basis for that, which is also how we used our flexible frontage provisions and our FDRPs. So this is similar, but quite a bit beyond that. So it's something that I think will be of interest to future home buyers in the community. And as you know, or have heard, the Healthy Places by Design project had a very, very healthy public participation element associated with it. It was one of the, probably the best projects that the town has ever worked on in terms of public participation and appreciation.
Maria, this is Paul. Are you talking about Scott Millar's work with Peter
Yes.
Flinker and, yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, again, Randall Arendt did the baseline with Rural by Design, and a lot of people have expanded upon that and refined it. I think a lot of communities erred in the early adoption of that philosophy, and there were multitude of unintended consequences with regards to adopting Randall Arendt's program.
And the newer version is also an outgrowth of a planning classic dealing with change in the Connecticut River Valley by Flinker and Yarrow and Dodson. And that's Peter Flinker has been doing the work with Scott Millar with that. So Jamie, you're going to send us this this list and ask us to attempt to prioritize it. I won't even bring up the idea of having an experienced professional present at our future a future work session, a 20-minute talk about pervious pavers and how they have been applied in both commercial and residential and state facilities projects across the state. I guess that can be in parentheses somewhere on the list.
Under stormwater management.
Yes. Josh?
My only thought, this is sort of nitpicky process thing, but thinking about, these are all such great things. And I'd love to, if we had all the time in the world, this is the challenge of prioritizing. It's always between good things that you'd like to give more time to. So just a nitpicky process thing is to make sure that maybe it's best just to rank them straight from, 1 to however many there are, only in the interest that I'd be in danger of ranking many of them very high, and then you lose the value of prioritizing things.
Well, again, the goal of, and the difficulty, and to Josh's point, everyone's going to potentially rank them based on the subject matter. And then what's important to the planning board with regards to subject matter then needs to be prioritized. So I'll try and give clear direction of, I'm not necessarily having you prioritize them in a workload setting, but prioritize them in a subject matter, what you feel is important to the planning board, important to South Kingstown. Once we get those that rise to the top, we then can look at the prioritization. I think, my primary number one in the near term is starting on those design guidelines as the, things of, we've talked about above a duplex and primarily commercial settings, but I think what you're seeing on the duplex realm, that I've received some comments from planning board members that we need to also add duplexes to the discussion in order to get better design of those that we're starting to see pop up in town. You know, and again, I just worked with other community where we're trying to develop a process where if we have a pre-approved design, that the permitting process is expedited. So if you have a duplex and there are 4 pre-approved duplexes that the planning board and the community has said are appropriate, that if you choose one of those designs, then you basically go to the zoning board, you know, you go to the building department and submit your site plan and get your duplex approved. We're doing that in another community with accessory dwelling units. So pre-approved plan, zoning permit, building permit, no planning board or zoning board approval. It's a pre-vetted kind of approved site plan and building plan.
So Jamie, I know that some communities have
On
started.
Portland, yep.
Have started looking at form-based codes, some of them primarily in commercial areas. I just think we need to proceed cautiously while we do want to have as smooth as possible a process. We don't want to completely eliminate the public element from the process where it's warranted.
Yes.
Why don't we move on then, unless anyone has any other comments relating to the work program. Any reports from liaison activities? Josh, Joe, I'm thinking of you guys for.
Well, right before this meeting, I attended the steering committee for the 300th anniversary. Susan was also in attendance on that. And a lot of the discussion was trying to identify different events that could occur during the year. There's nothing formal yet. I haven't seen anything in writing. I expect maybe over the next couple of meetings, we'll start seeing some drafts in writing as far as some of the events and the activities and organizations involved. But some of the things they were talking about was a lecture series on the history of the different areas of the town, maybe a lecture series on the bike/train trail that went from Kingston to Narragansett, maybe trolley tours, historic home tours. There's some interest in some streetscaping to be a part of that event for the anniversary there. There was a representative from the Narragansetts, and they thought that the tribe would want to participate in having an event. So there's a lot of discussions. Also getting high school students involved and getting grade school students involved. And some of these things there's a lead that's being assigned, but I expect, like I said, over the next couple of meetings that to become a little more formal. So anyways, that's where they stand.
Thanks, Joe. Sounds really good. Anyone else? And I think as Jamie stated, the scenic roadway group is continuing now to meet and is looking to develop language. So moving along, we may end up getting a little bit of help, some outside help in doing so. And as folks know, Paul and I, as volunteers, not as planning board members, have been participating in the Saugatucket project, which per our previous work session, the town is taking on as a town-wide project, and hoping that as it moves along, some of the final products may be able to coincide with the 300th anniversary as well. If there's nothing else, any update, Amy, on legal issues? Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie, I skipped over you. You're still muted. Okay, sounds good. Amy, anything for us to know related to legal?
You know that we are on Zoom again, and that the current executive order permitting remote meetings expires on Valentine's Day. I know, it's like deja vu every month that I say this. Now it is really up to the legislature to decide whether or not to extend Governor McKee's emergency authority to issue these executive orders. So we're all waiting to see what's going to happen. My understanding, or I've heard, that there's a bill that's been introduced that would extend that authority to April, can't recall if it's April 15th, but a couple months. So, and then we're waiting to see if Governor McKee reissues or renews the current executive order. So the only thing I have to say is just stay tuned, and I'll keep you all advised. That's the only thing I can think of right now. Thanks.
Thanks, Amy. If there's nothing else, would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
That was from Joe. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second from Susan. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye and raise your hands.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Thank you all.